Hi, hey there.
What's going on?
Looking good, nice setup. So I assume you're working for a certain company called Internetrix, right?
Yes, that's accurate. Yeah.
That's good on display. All right, Mikey, stage is yours.
All right. I should have worked out how to drive this. How do I share the screen? Share. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yep. All right. So, g'day everyone. I'm Mikey. I'm talking about this journey from the lab to the cloud, a journey of deployments. So, like I said, just call me Mikey. My name is Michael Caruana. I'm a full stack developer and I'm a team lead here at Internetrix. Once upon a time, I used to be a webmaster for a university website, and then I went on to be an Oracle Web Center consultant and traveled around Australia and New Zealand. But for the last 7 years, I've been working with you guys in Silverstripe land. I just wanted to mention some of my life experience. I'm a former user, current dad to Mr. 9 and Miss 6. So my presentation today is actually dedicated to Miss 6. She's got me interested in unicorns. It's all about unicorns. So I've actually been to presented at StripeCon before. I was at the Slovenian StripeCon in 2016, and I gave a talk on deploying into China using multi-region deployments and language. We had a language module that was pretty relevant to European audiences. It was a great time at Slovenia, great country, and we got pretty wasted. So Internetrix, we obviously we're in Australia. We've got about 20 employees here. We're located in Wollongong, which is about 80 kilometres south of Sydney. We've got remote workers currently in Russia. We had people in Sri Lanka, all around the place. And we specialize in digital analytics, websites, data science, IT consulting. But obviously, we're here for websites, for Silverstripe. We've been a partner with them for since 2000. So what is this journey I'm here to talk about? It's about sending code from the lab, GitLab, up into the cloud, which is the Silverstripe Cloud platform, via automated deployments, which is CI/CD. And so I tried to put together like a diagram of how this all flows and works for this journey. The diagram was a bit dry. So I asked my daughter about it. I said, how would you describe this process? And she said, well, it's like you have your unicorns down on the ground. That's your GitLab, your Git code, and they ride the rainbow up into the sky, up into the cloud where they can live. I thought, yeah, that's great. So here's that diagram improved. So the lab deploy along the rainbow up into the cloud, which is the Silverstripe Cloud. So the lab, it's what we're using is Git. So as most of you probably know, it's got a description there straight out of Wikipedia. It's about version control, so all your developers can write code happily together. So GitHub is a place where you can store, share, and collaborate data together on Git repositories. And then GitLab is where you run your own instance on your own server. So yeah, starting here from GitLab. So what are these automated deployments? Well, we're talking about continuous integration and continuous development. So those processes can spawn jobs. A job might be to execute a task, run a unit test, all those sorts of things. From GitLab has a runner that automatically executes each job and then returns a result. All these jobs execute in a pipeline, and pipelines have preset stages. So what what is this cloud that I keep talking about? It's Silverstripe Cloud. So Silverstripe Cloud is a fully managed hosting platform offered by Silverstripe New Zealand. So we're using it for a couple of our websites for our customers. It's based on AWS technologies. It gives you a much simpler interface where you just manage your deployments, and it also has an API so you can interact with the program. So what are the advantages of using Silverstripe Cloud? Just point and click or schedule deployments, no mucking around writing code or anything like that. They provide automatic server maintenance, upgrades for Apache and those sorts of things. They give you free SSL these days. You can whitelist IPs. They have an advanced logging area for your server logs, and they provide some basic metrics. Their cloud also has cron queue jobs integration, so you can have things running at certain times. They allow you to self-manage your database and your assets using snapshots, so you can generate whenever you need and download. And a great advantage is their help desk support. However, I don't actually work for Silverstripe, so I should probably mention some of the not so advantages of their cloud. So you can't actually access the database once it's up in the cloud. You have to rely on downloading a snapshot and finding out what's going. As I said before, there's no actual access via SSH or FTP. Most of the time it's an advantage, but as a developer, you'll probably find it's a disadvantage. The cloud, because it's built by Silverstripe for Silverstripe sites, it actually requires that you install a Silverstripe instance on their cloud. Cloud isn't free. I don't know how competitive the prices are. I'm not an accountant. I'm just putting it out there. The help desk that they do have, like I said, it's great, but it is on New Zealand time. So for us here in Australia, we might be working late, something goes wrong, go to contact them, they've already gone home. I imagine for you guys in Europe, it's a bit more significant. And the other thing that they can't really help with is custom code. So we try to do something crazy in GraphQL, they're not going to know about it. They can't really help us. Anyway, so back to this journey. Why was I talking about this journey? It's all about continuous development and deployment. You want to get those unicorns up along the rainbow. So, you know, you in GitLab, you do your commits, you do unit tests, you then do a merge request and a master, and it builds the final code, deploy it up into the cloud. But you want all this to be automated. So typical cloud deployment is you would go into the platform and you would create a new deployment. You say, hey, I want to make this deployment. And it just goes and reads your Git code straight out of GitLab using one of their deploy keys that you've provided to your GitLab. You can then set a schedule and say, I want this to start tonight at 9 p.m. or you can just click the button and off it goes. And it will literally run a composer install, it'll do a dev build, it'll provision some servers, load balancing, does all that, and then presto, it's all done. So it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. It's good to use. Some of the less typical scenarios that we encountered were we were trying to deploy on Silverstripe sites. So we were trying to deploy a React front end for a headless website, and we wanted it on a separate server so that we could deploy them separately. So to do that, we had to fake a Silverstripe site. So the minimum bits that were required for that were the framework, the database connector, and the cron bits. Once those are in there, it didn't really care what else we put in there, just as long as it looked like a Silverstripe site. And so one of the ways we got that React site up there is rather than trying to build it all on the server every time we deploy, we actually just send a bundle. So the GitLab pipelines can generate an artifact where you've pre-built your site and it gets stored as an artifact. Then we just send it up along the rainbow and it lands in the cloud without having to do any extra work. So it's a faster deployment, no composer, no dev building. But like I said, at the end, it still needs to be a Silverstripe site, so it needs to pass a ping test so they could verify that it installed safely. So, but that's all point and click so far, or scheduled. But you want to actually automate it. You want that magic wand to just go. So how do you automate these deployments? You got to be able to tell it what you want to deploy, and you want to get some feedback on how. So the cloud offers a pretty cool API. It just requires an API token that you set up when you log in, and it's attached to your profile. And you can then use HTTP basic authentication with your token to communicate along that API. So the API is pretty good. It allows you to view information about your stacks or your servers, the environment information they have, all the modules that are installed on your Silverstripe instance, and the composer scripts associated with that. You get information about your deployments, your snapshots, even who's on your team, domains you're managing, and the security certificates on that. But obviously, the main thing it does is it fetches from Git, and then you can then create and start deployments. That's what we really need it to do. And the API is just all JSON format. So we are using JQ to pass that information. JQ is just a shell script that can read JSON requests. So I've got here a small API example where I'm posting to create a new deployment. So in this example, server is just called stack 1, and I'm deploying to production. So in that little body snippet there, I've got a package from, which is just a reference to our GitLab artifact. And we can deploy it as a package, but normally it's expecting the SHA ref type, which is just your commit hash. You can tell it to do a branch, a tag, or just redeploy whatever it did previously. So that gets sent off through the API, and then what comes back is a JSON response, which includes a link to this new deployment that you've created. So once you've got that link to the new deployment, you can then ping it to see what it's doing and how it's going. So that's just a GET request, pretty similar URL, but in this case, it's the first deployment. It's got a deployment of 1. And I'm just watching the state. So in that pink area, you can see the JSON response that I'm getting, and it's sending me, as a part of that, it'll tell me all the timestamps of when it was created, when it started. The one I'm interested in is the state. So the state, there's all these different values for state that tells me what it's doing. It could be deploying, or it could have failed, or it could be queued, or it could be complete. Just keep pinging until you get the response you want. So to get all this up and running, you got to connect to your GitLab and put in some configuration information. So you go to your project and you set up some project variables. You need your deploy key from the cloud so that it can read your project. And then you want to also add that API token so you can authorize your runner to talk to the API. And then in GitLab, you've got a YAML file that describes your continuous integration. And in that, you would set up stages for building and deploying as a minimum. And so what we've been doing is we use a build to generate the artifact, and then we would deploy using a shell script which talks through the API. So here's an example of a YAML file. Got the 2 stages at the top, and then I've got a build dev job. It knows it's a build stage, and it's generating artifacts and putting them into that build area. It's just executing a script to do a yarn command, and it knows to run on the production branch. And then on the other side, I've got the deploy job, and it's just executing a script which will talk to the API. It's also got variables in there. It's got a Git strategy and none, so it knows not to do another checkout or to run any Git hooks because it's already done all the work on build dev. I just want to send a package. So this was all great, and theoretically it all worked, but we did run into some problems. There were tears. So there were three main hurdles we had. Were the artifacts themselves that came out of GitLab had they weren't quite what we expected. We also had some limitations from the API itself that I don't know Silverstripe are actually aware of. And third one was we hit a rate limit. So the artifacts that come out of GitLab, turns out they're only accessible after the pipeline's finished. So we can't just have a simple pipeline where we build and then deploy what we've built, because it's not available until it's finished. And I poked around on the internet for a while, looking at forums and stuff for anyone who'd figured out what to do. And eventually I just came up with a solution of using a separate pipeline. So what I do is I tell GitLab to trigger a second pipeline. And for that, I just need a GitLab token to connect the two. So in this pink area, I've got part of the GitLab YAML. Just added an extra script where it does a curl back into GitLab with the pipeline trigger on it. So then the second limitation was the API itself. As it turns out, it was only returning the status of the latest job, which is not necessarily the one you asked for. We also found that if you got two deployments kicked off at the same time, one could invalidate the other and cancel each other out, or they would get confused as to which one is deployed. Sometimes even the platform be unable to finish the second one after the first one started. So our solution was to just deploy them one at a time. So we made sure that the GitLab runners were shared, so that way jobs would run sequentially and they would have to wait for each other. The only trick with that is we just have to be careful that we don't go into the platform itself and click deploy. So then the third hurdle we had was the rate limit. It turns out as we were pinging the API, we were getting these 429 errors, and at that time I wasn't quite sure what that was. I had to go look it up. It actually meant that we were hitting it too often. And Cloud, I contacted Cloud, and they confirmed that it only accepts 5 requests a second from a single IP address. So what was happening was our server was pinging away to get the status, and at the same time I was visiting the Cloud website, pressing refresh repeatedly to see what was going on, and lo and behold, the thing crashed. So the solution to that was to tell the script to poll the platform, but each time it polled, I had to check the HTTP status before I tried to do something with the response. And if I got a 429, I just tell it to wait a few seconds and try again. So now we've got all that done, we're able to ride the rainbow. So the project variables, as I said before, you need your deploy key for the read access, your API token for authorizations. Then I had to add a pipeline trigger token so I can get that second pipeline up and running. So over in the YAML file, you got your stages for build and deploy, but build generates an artifact, then it has to stop, finish its pipeline, and then trigger a second pipeline. So that second pipeline knows to only deploy, and it executes the shell script, and it knows only to execute. It's got that trigger. And the last thing there is that the script will poll away politely and waiting until it gets the completed flag back from the platform. So that's the end of this journey. I hope you enjoyed riding the rainbow with me. So these are my contact details if you wanted to contact me.